so fire. Y'all got one of the best shows in the world. So y'all the fans need to tune on to this show.
Boxing fans, welcome back to another edition of Tell Us About That. I'm your host, On Fire, and I'm here to take you on a thrilling journey through the world of boxing. It is my honor to welcome today's guest, an Emmy Award-winning producer whose creativity and expertise has brought us behind the scenes insights of Showtime Boxing through All Access. A real pioneer in the field, a writer, producer, and creator of things of VZ Street Productions, Patrick STRAUB. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. What an intro, man. That was awesome.
Oh, man. Thank you, man. I'm glad you enjoy it. You know, to have someone on like yourself, an Emmy Award winner in a sport that you and I both love and follow. I mean, it's a pleasure and an honor. And so I had to do that in the right way.
You know, I remember when you first brought this up as having me on the guest, I thought, man, it'd be so cool to actually get that done. So it's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
And we thank you again. So tell us a little bit about your schooling and where you grew up.
I grew up in Washington, D.C. proper, 202, still got my 202. I went to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. And I was a political science major. I wasn't a communications major. I wasn't in broadcast journalism or anything like that. I was just, I always tell people I could have thrown darts at a board and hit political science. And I would have been like, okay, political science is my major. And I remember all my family friends, our parents' friends saying, oh, well, you're a political science major. You're probably going to go to law school then. And I remember thinking, no, is that something that people do with political science majors? I have no intention. And when I left, I had always kind of wanted to be involved in sports television. I loved sports. I followed sports, and it seemed like a natural path for me. And I got going working the U.S. Open tennis tournament up here in New York, up in Queens. And I did that. You spend 2 months, you're kind of really embedded in it. And I really loved it. And I'm just running around and I'm helping, you're basically a glorified intern doing that stuff. I was just out of college, and you're running around with camera guys and they're getting beauty shots, and you really kind of start to learn and understand what goes into this stuff, and made some connections through there and just kind of slowly rolled my career along. And you work jobs and you do jobs in sports and outside of sports. But somewhere along the line, I got involved with NBCsports.com. And that was really when I started to get into combat sports. And I grew up a mild boxing fan. I grew up in, the Tyson heydays was when I was a kid. And, I always say everyone loved Tyson because Tyson fought the way that I think you dreamed of fighting if you were a fighter. He would just go in there and just exert his will on his opponents and kind of seem to do whatever he wanted and just, give him the heavy hand and they were out. But boxing kind of went away from me. I got involved in MMA a lot. I covered UFC, and I got kind of really into that. And we had a weekly show we did at NBCsports.com. It was myself and another producer, and that was really a good foray into like kind of the really creative decision making for me. And we would do little story vignettes on fighters. But eventually, I left there, made my way to HBO. Started doing boxing stuff at HBO, and really still promotional at that point. And they were HBO was still doing, that was in the 24/7 days. And 24/7, long live 24/7. HBO boxing is now dead, but 24/7 was really a pioneer in modern day sports documentary series. And I don't know if you remember that was Mayweather Hatton. Mayweather De La Hoya was the very first 24/7. And then they would do Pacquiao. And this is when, Mayweather and Pacquiao were in their primes and everyone was clamoring for the two of them to fight. Of course, they did that too late. But eventually I then found my way to Showtime, and I became full-time at Showtime and really started to build from there, doing feature work, and eventually started working fight camps for All Access. And that was really a dream of mine. Because I remember watching those early 24/7s, and I was really fresh out of college. And I remember watching those and thinking, this is what I want to do. This is just spectacular. I want to be in the camps with these guys. I want to interview them. I want to tell their stories. And, it's a funny thing, man. It's like a speak it into existence thing. I really kind of dreamed about it. And you still kind of winding your career along. Your career is going to take you wherever it's going to take you. But eventually I'm all of a sudden at Showtime Sports, and I'm doing that. I'm in the fight camps. I'm with these guys. And it's been beautiful. It's been great. The very first camp I ever worked was Danny Jacobs for the Danny Jacobs Peter Quillen fight, which ended in the first round. That was like the battle for Brooklyn. It was billed because those were two Brooklyn boys.
I know both of those guys personally. We fought in the amateurs in the same years. I've interviewed them guys many times throughout their career. So how was the transition from NBC to HBO and Showtime? What was the work process between those three?
So NBCSports.com, I was there for like a year, and I was on a 1-year contract, and that was from 2000. I remember perfectly, 2007 to 2008, and the housing market crashed. Remember in 2008, and had such an enormous ripple effect financially that people at NBC were getting laid off left and right. And the hope for people in my position was you do a good enough job that they offer you a full-time gig after your 1-year contract is up. And because everyone was getting laid off left and right, they weren't hiring anybody. So like by the time that was done, I said, okay, well, and then I'd made some contacts around the MMA world. And so I started doing features on MMA fighters and UFC fighters. And that sport was young enough and still coming up that they really liked having that promotional work. You couldn't do that with football players. You couldn't do that with NBA. I couldn't call up NBA players' agents and say, oh, I want to do a little vignette, or even a more established individual sport like golf or tennis. You probably wouldn't be able to do that. MMA still hungered for that exposure. And so I was just this guy with a camera and, interview skills. And I would go, I remember I visited Jim Miller, who was a great fighter and still fighting in the UFC, by the way. Great dude. I did feature on him. I did a few of those. And then eventually I really wanted to work at HBO because I had this affinity for them from my time watching 24/7. They were, they were on a pedestal for me. And so I looked to knock on that door, and I finally found a connection to knock on a door that got me into HBO. And what was different there was it was strictly promotional work that I was doing. It was 30-second spot. I would produce, write, and edit 30-second spots for HBO Boxing After Dark, which was their Friday night special, and for the 24/7 series. And it was just like, Pacquiao, Margarito 3, I think, 2, maybe 2 and 3, Mayweather, Pacquiao Marquez, excuse me, not Margarito, Pacquiao Marquez. Remember, they had those 4 epic fights. And then Mayweather Marquez was during that time. And that was when Mayweather came back out of retirement after he had retired following Hatton. So that was about that time. And I was still not quite doing, I was on my way, but I wasn't going into camps. I wasn't with the fighters so much anymore as I was a little bit when I was doing MMA work at NBC. And a friend of mine at HBO that I had made at HBO my time there, I was there for about a year, said, hey, I have a friend at Showtime Sports. They're looking for people. Would you be interested in talking to him? So I went and interviewed there and talked to him, and they said, yeah, we like you, come on board. And that was a great boon for me. That really kind of helped put me into fight camps where I wanted to be, interviewing fighters, talking to fighters, building the rapport, building storylines like I wanted to build.
How much of wanting to do this was you actually being a boxing fan as opposed to just being a producer?
That's a good question. I think it was important for me. And I would say this to anybody going into going into the workforce. I think people talk about, do what you love and do what you love. I love being a producer, and I love storytelling. And as I've gotten older, the idea of telling stories outside of sports is a little bit more appealing to me, although I still love working in sports. But sports was such an easy, and combat sports was such an easy avenue for me because I naturally kind of gobbled that up. I loved taking in that information. I loved watching the fights. I loved, and again, I'd gotten kind of away from boxing, but as soon as I started working at HBO, I really started to gobble up those fights again. I really started to kind of pay attention to the landscape of the sport rather. Who were the champions? Who were the up and comers? Who were the likely challengers that would become champions? And you really kind of start to understand these guys. And by the time I really was into my career at Showtime, I knew the landscape well, and I know the landscape decently well now, and I haven't stopped. I love it. And my wife, and Chelsea, Chelsea loves the fights. Chelsea, if there's a big fight on, I say, sweetheart, there's a big fight on tonight. She said, okay, we got to get it. We got to watch it. We got to buy the pay-per-view, whatever it is. So I'm lucky to be married to a woman who not only is okay with me watching that stuff, but has a hunger for it herself.
So you move to Showtime, you start getting into fight camps and spending more time with fighters. How prepared are you for this?
As far as I was concerned, I'd prepared. I don't want to be cheesy and say my whole life, but as I said, from those early 24/7s, wanting to do this, I felt that I was made to do this. I felt like I was the kind of person, and that I had the personality. And I'm not good at tooting my own horn, but I suppose I am a little bit here. I had the personality that lent itself to walking into a fight camp and connecting with the fighter, connecting with the professional athlete, connecting with his camp, and being able to talk to him on his level, give him the respect that he deserves, but also not be starstruck and not be intimidated. And I think that's an important balance that I always try to strike. I never try to be in awe of the person I'm covering. The only time that really kind of, it was really cool for me to do that, I just did a one-day shoot with Bernard Hopkins. And I grew up when I was a teenager watching Bernard. And so for me, suddenly being in 50-year-old Bernard Hopkins camp when he won the world championship again was just too cool, because I sat with my father as like a 15-year-old kid watching Hopkins. But I still wasn't, it wasn't like I couldn't speak and was tongue-tied. But I always thought that my personality lent itself well to being in that atmosphere and getting what I needed to get out of it. And so that's why it felt right to me.
It's no secret, and sometimes it's reported, some fighters are harder to work with than others. Without mentioning any names, how does that affect production of a good series or a good episode?
I appreciate you not asking me for any names, because I don't give any names. It matters. It's some guys are, they kick open the doors and they say, welcome, come in. What are we going to talk about? And some guys are very guarded and seem to not really want you around much. And, and so it's like pulling teeth. It gets really hard. And then, I'm giving this footage to an editor or to an edit team, and it makes their job incredibly difficult, because I work with Fighter A, and Fighter A gives me all the interviews that I want and gives me great sound bites. And I can say, oh, I want to do this scene. I want to have dinner scene with your family or with your kid or do whatever. And it's great. And I can do that. And then some guys, it's tough. And I had that on a number of occasions. I've had that where guys kind of, they're tougher. And some guys obviously are naturally better on television than others. And that's just the nature of personalities. But what's really tough is when they kind of shut you out. Without mentioning bad names, I'll mention some great names. I mean, I had the privilege of covering Pacquiao twice. And I went to the Philippines once to cover him. Very exciting. I covered him in the lead up to his fight with Broner. And I went to the Philippines to cover hhim there. And I covered him in the lead up to his fight with Thurman. And I only covered him in LA there. Pacquiao, for all what we're doing is promotional. And so the fighters need us. The promotion needs us. The fight needs us. The fighters, by and large, need us. Except if you're at the level of a Manny Pacquiao or a Floyd Mayweather. Then they don't need us. We need them. Pacquiao was great. Pacquiao could not have been more. Now Pacquiao, we like guys to talk shit about each other. We like guys to talk shit, Pacquiao doesn't do that. And especially kind of at that point in his career, he was in his 40s. He really didn't want to do that. So, you can try to be like, oh, well, Keith Thurman said he's gonna knock you out in the 5th round. And Pat Manny would say, "Oh yeah, it's good for him. Good for him for thinking that." And Manny wouldn't give you that, and you got to roll with that and smile about it because that's just the nature of who he is. But he was great in that he really opened his doors. When I covered him in L.A., you literally would just walk into his house. He would just tell you to walk into his house. He'd have his team there. You'd walk in and you'd try to start filming and do whatever. Now, Manny wouldn't dance for you, metaphorically. He's not going to just kind of do whatever you want him to do. But, you want to be around, you want to film, be my guest, hang out. But it's to answer your question, I feel like I've digressed. Yeah, it is tough, and it's tough on the production, and it's really tough on the edit team to try to squeeze a good story out of a guy who, there's been cases where guys don't show up for interviews. You set up an interview, we're going to come sit down at this time in the gym or at your house or whatever. They just don't show up. And, what do? You try to build the story as best you can with voiceover, some sound bites along the way. And that's on the edit team. That's the power of having a great editor and a great edit team to be able to do that. So you do the best you can, and it goes how it goes.
So how were you able to balance giving content for the hardcore boxing fan, but also for the broader audience?
You're going to give the hardcore boxing fan the stuff that they love. You're going to get the training footage, hit and mitts, cool montages with good music, with hype, songs. They're going to get what they came for. And then because they love the fight game, they're going to love whatever you give them behind the scenes. It's the concept of, okay, so the Olympics, if you watch the Olympics and watch some of the Paris Olympics coming up this summer, and you watch the coverage on NBC, what you'll see is in between the events are these kind of human interest stories where they dive into the athlete's personal life, right? And here's the athlete with their daughter, and they're playing with their daughter, and they're going sledding, or they're going on a boat ride, or it's adorable. These are human interest stories. Those are not designed for the people that are going to watch the Olympics. There are people who are going to watch the Olympics no matter what. There are people who are going to watch boxing and are going to watch these shows because they love these fighters. So you have to create content that is outside of the gym. You need stuff with friends, family. We shoot dinner scenes certainly all the time. The more creative you can get with these things, the better, obviously. Sometimes you might, you try to find where some drama might be occurring in their lives and talk about that, because that's an interesting storyline. And how is that affecting them in their preparation? One storyline that I always am fascinated with, I'm fascinated by the sheer quantity of father-son relationships in the sport, usually existing as trainer-fighter. And inevitably, there are great success stories of father-son as trainer-fighter, and there are stories of train wrecks and guys, relationships that are at odds with each other. And you can usually find some morsel of, it's always interesting to watch the father-son operate, because especially when you're covering these guys at this level, the father's been training them since they were a little kid. They put gloves on them when the gloves were bigger than their heads, when they were like 6 years old, and no one knew their name and no one gave a damn about them. Now they are superstars. Now they're stars in the sport, and people don't really know their father. And so the relationship kind of shifts, right? The son is not this little kid who's just listening to his father bark at him anymore. The son has a say in this. The son is a commodity, much more so than the father. And so it becomes interesting, and this is obviously just an example of Father Sunday, but it becomes interesting to watch that dynamic between them. I covered Teofimo Lopez and his father. I covered Danny Garcia and his father, Angel. I covered Sean Porter and his father, Kenny. And, and the fathers are all these fathers are very alpha individuals. And so when their sons all of a sudden become these stars in the sport, I think it's probably, and I can't speak to this certainly. I'm not even a father now, let alone a father of a boxer. But I think it's probably difficult for them to kind of come to grips with the reality of I can't just chew my son out anymore all the time. My son isn't going to just put up with that. My son is kind of his own man and has, risen to, he's got a world championship belt, and he's the one they want to interview, not me. We're not going to dusty gyms on Friday nights to fight in local shows anymore. We're fighting on the big stage. So those are storylines you always look for. Anything outside of the gym, you always want to have that balance with those scenes. You always want to rope in things. And I always talk about when we have meetings in the lead up to these shows that we do, how many scenes, what kind of scenes are we looking for outside of the gym? We're going to get the stuff in the gym. They're going to hit the mitts. They're going to hit the heavy bag. You're going to get that stuff all the time. Obviously, you're going to go for a run. That's great. But what's happening in their life outside of the gym that helps or hinders their preparation mentally for this fight?
How much of the process from beginning to end of something like an episode do you have a hand in? Is it just the producing and then you sit back and wait to see what editing looks like, or are you involved in the process from beginning to end?
I'm definitely there right at the beginning, because the beginning is conceptualizing. Beginning is we're covering these two fighters, and I should know. I for all the rest in peace Showtime Sports All Access, because Showtime Sports is now dead and there's no more All Access. What I'm doing right now, the show that I work on now is strictly blood, sweat, and tears for ESPN for Top Rank, and I was just last week, or excuse me, a week and a half ago, I was in Jermaine Ortiz's camp up in Worcester, Mass, because he's got this fight coming up against Teofimo Lopez. But I'm there at the beginning because in the beginning it's Zoom calls and FaceTimes and phone calls with the executive producer or director of the show, talking about what storylines we're tracking as we watch these guys prepare for this fight. And what are we when we do these interviews, what are we talking to them about? What is the most interesting thing happening in their life? Obviously the fight, but surrounding that, in the lead up to that, what else is going on in their life? And so I'm certainly heavily involved in the beginning, and then through the shoot. Obviously I'm the boots on the ground along with my crew, and we are, we're gathering up all the interviews and all the sound bites and all the visuals that are going to be in the show at that point, along with another crew that's in the other camp. After that, we hand off the footage. I will have conversations with these guys, with the edit team, as they're going about it. And I might, reach back out to the camp. They might want like old photos, or they might want, something else from the camp. But I'm not in the edit room. I'm not post-producing. They have guys that they've hired to do that, and they like to generally kind of keep that separate. So the editing process for these shows is not typically one that I'm heavily involved in. There's an edit team, typically very good edit team, and certainly the stuff that I work on, I'm fortunate enough to have great edit teams that work on these things. And so I'll kind of take it beginning to through the shoot, and then once the shoot is done, you give them the footage and say, "Go do great work, guys."
Name some of the fighters that you've worked with.
Okay, so it was the Jane Jacobs, it was Manny Pacquiao, Gervonta Davis, Teofimo Lopez, Jermaine Ortiz, Vasily Lomachenko, Lamont Peterson, Sergey Lipinov, Sean Porter, Shakur Stevenson.
Have you ever had some footage where you went and you did some shooting, and when you were done, you felt to yourself, man, this is it. We got something here. We got jewels. And then it actually turned that way when they did the editing?
Yeah, I think that kind of go anyway. Look, I mean, one of the things, and by the way, Jake Paul, I've worked with a number of times too, which was really interesting and kind of a shift from my normal. Yeah, I mean, look, I go into camp and I go into one fighter's camp, And my job is to do the very best I can do in that fighter's camp and get all and squeeze as much juice out of as I can out of that fighter's camp. There's another crew in the other fighters' camp that I have nothing to do with. Now, I might talk to the other producer, and there might be like a soundbite of shit talking in that interview, and we might share with each other to throw together. Well, this guy said he's gonna knock you out in the third round. He's gonna have you gasping for air. What do you say about that? Something like that. But I got to pull my weight over here. They've got to pull their weight over there, and then the edit teams got to pull that all together cohesively. I have had probably every sort of example where I can think of every single kind of example where I walked out of camp and thought, man, we did awesome. We got everything we want. I got so many sound bites. I got so many great scenes. And then you watch the show and you're like, I've had times when, I can think of one time, myself and my DP, we were like 3 days into the shoot and we were like, man, we do not feel like we're doing great here. I wish we got, yeah. And I remember we had sent the footage back to our edit team and they called us and they were like, you guys are doing awesome. This is fantastic stuff. And we looked at each other. We were like, okay, cool. That's great. I'm glad you think so. And then the show comes out and it's phenomenal. It can kind of go either way. It's very much a team, atmosphere like that. Everyone's got to pull their weight. It's not just like, well, if I do my job great, then this is going to be great. Or if I, don't get everything I want and think I need, it's going to be crap. There's great edit teams that can do great things with very little. And I've been very fortunate to work with some of those edit teams, a lot of those edit teams. And obviously I want to do the best I can to get them all of the best stuff that I can. And the more that I do that, the better the show will be. But look, I can think of an example of we did great on our side and the other camp did terrible. They did crap. And the show could have won an Emmy. And because the other side was such crap, it was not even nominated, and what are you going to do about it? You just, it's the best you can just kind of say, shrug your shoulders and say, well, it's the way it is. I wish they'd done a better job. It can go either way.
In 2014, you won an Emmy. Let's talk about how you felt when you were nominated.
Good. It's an amazing feeling to be part of an Emmy-winning team. We did a bunch of stuff during the Mayweather years at Showtime, and I was part of actually multiple Emmy-winning teams, which was great. And what really is heartening is to know that the stuff that you're doing actually contributed to what happened. And one of my proudest moments of an Emmy-winning show, Mayweather Pacquiao All Access, and I was tasked with going to Mexico City to interview. There was an aspect of the show where we were interviewing all of the common opponents that the two of them had. That was Miguel Cotto. That was it was Marquez. I was going to, but who am I? Shane Mosley, and then Marquez. And I was tasked. I went to Mexico City to interview Juan Manuel Marquez. I learned right before going down there that the WBC was making a special championship belt for that fight, for the winner of that fight. The WBC's belt making factory was in Mexico City. And I set up where we went to the factory and saw them kind of putting that belt together. And I remember the guy saying to me, he said, the factory is not like a very pretty place. I said, oh, I'm sure it'll, whatever it is what it is. I'm fine. And, he's thinking that we want to shoot something with white marble columns and it was beautiful because it was gritty and dirty And there's these guys with just there's soot all over their face, and there's these giant machines that are, you put your hand in it, it'll chop your hand off like knife through butter. And this is how they make the championship belts. And there's like beams of sunlight shooting in through like metal, facade that they put up, and it's roaring fires in the flames so they can like melt, metal to like fuse it together. And in that sense, it was gorgeous. And it's the idea of this beautiful sparkling championship belt, which is going to be presented to this winner who's got hundreds of millions of dollars in this, big arena with screaming fans and all this money. And it begins, as a fighter begins, in this dungy, dirty place. And these guys are, they're there, and they got dirt under their fingernails, and they're just doing this fine little detailed work on this thing. And it's this beautiful metaphor. And so we shot all of these little details along the way, and the show opened up. One of the episodes, I think the second to last episode before the fight, opened up in that factory, them putting the belt together, making the belt out of all the stuff that we had shot there. And that I think was I think that went a long way. That was beautiful footage, and I set that up, and it made me feel really good to be part of something that I felt like had a big hand in helping that get the Emmy. Now, the Emmy process being what it is, we're talking about Mayweather Pacquiao. That fight had so many eyeballs on it, and that show had so many eyeballs on it. It was going to be hard not to win the Emmy because it had so much attention. But nonetheless, that's something that I did, and I always felt good about myself that I do something like that, and that's when you pat yourself on the back a little bit, I think.
How hard was it for you to separate when the fighters give you the access that you need and want, and still be able to keep the authenticity of the story?
Yeah, look, and the more I've gotten along in this, I really enjoy sitting down with a guy and really challenging them in interviews. I really enjoy that. And if there's a struggle going on in their lives, in the ring or outside of the ring, I want to talk to them about that. I'm going to ask the question. They're going to answer however they want to answer. But not only do I, have trouble staying true to the authenticity, I like to think I really kind of go for it. I really harp on it. Because that's where it's interesting, man. Anybody can sit there and be like, and take a fluffy, flowery story about, everything's great, and we train really hard, and everybody in camp gets along really well, and it's beautiful and lovely, and oh man, I'm an undefeated fighter, and I got all these championship belts. That's fucking boring. What is the harsh part of your life? And this is, think about what you're interested in when you watch a movie, or when you watch a documentary, when you read a book, anything. What is the struggle? That's where you really get into something. What is the struggle? If I'm not pulling out the struggle, if I'm not finding the struggle and diving into it, then I'm not properly doing my job, and I'm going to deliver you boring crap content. And the guy can open his doors to me all he wants and be a willing participant. But if we're not talking about a challenge, or we're not talking about the struggle, then it's lousy television. It's lousy. And, that's the thing that I struggle with most when I go to camps, is to make sure that I'm getting that. And I've gotten into camps, and you're halfway through it, and I'm like, oh my God, man, like I don't feel like I'm getting what I want to get here. And sometimes I go in and I'm digging because you always go into a camp and you're looking for more of the story. You're looking for more of it. And you can read all you want to on the internet. But when you go into camp and meet someone and meet their teammates, their trainer, their manager, whoever's around them, you start to talk to them. I told a friend of mine who was coming up in this business, and he was giving some advice. I said, when you walk into the gym, you walk into a scene, everything is information. Talk to everybody. Find out everything. Talk to the guy hitting the speed bag in the corner. Talk to everybody that's there. Look at every single picture that's up there. I mean, you'll find him as a 10-year-old standing next to this guy in some picture in the corner. He's like this, and no one, and you say, what is this picture from? Everything is information. So you got to find the information, and then by doing that, you'll find the struggle, you'll find the drama, you'll find where their lives are interesting. And I tell these guys when I meet with them, I try to meet with them before we start shooting. I said, I want you to be honest about this. I want to talk to you about this. I want to talk to you about that. And I don't want you to hold back. This is an interesting aspect of your life. And sometimes these are things that are difficult for them to talk about. I talked to Gervonta Davis's mom about being a drug addict and having her children taken away from her by social services. And they didn't want to talk about that at first. And she warmed up to me, and Kenya was a very lovely woman. And she had dealt with struggles in her life. And I talked with her about it, and she opened up, and I talked with Gervonta about it, and he was honest about it. And, so I don't shy away from it at all. I go straight for it.
Talk to us about VZ Street Productions.
VZ Street Productions it's my S corp that I operate under. I do a lot of the sports documentary stuff. I'm doing a documentary right now on a fighter who I'd love to come back on and tell you about it when I'm done with it. But it's what I operate under. I get hired as the sole proprietor of VZ Street Productions, and then my services out. I did a project that's dropping on January 30th on Netflix, the 5-part docuseries on NASCAR, which has been started to be promoted for the last couple of weeks. We're all really excited about that. I was embedded in the world of NASCAR August, September, October, November, and just away from home for a long time, which was really hard on my wife. But she gives me her blessing to do that, which I appreciate. I have a partner in LA, and we scrounge up work every now and then. Some of it's just kind of promotional, commercial type stuff. And that's really what VZ Street Productions is to me. It's just, the vessel with which I am hired out and bring my income into. That's how I operate, and that's my freelance name.
And what other projects are you currently working on besides Top Rank and the Netflix series?
Those two, and then this documentary is taking up a good bit of my time. It's something I'm hoping to have done before the end of the year. It's a documentary with a great story. I'll just tell you, it is a boxer, retired, who was trained by his father. It's a story that as soon as I started to really learn how many father-son relationships, and they just keep pouring into the sport. They just keep coming. And I'm fascinated by it. I find it fascinating because, look at Floyd and his dad. Look at the success that Floyd had. His dad put boxing gloves on him, but Floyd has been on record saying his dad, his uncle trained him, but his dad initially trained him, and they have a terrible relationship now. Eventually the relationship fell to pieces, which, maybe there was a ticking time bomb. I don't know. But, and pouring into the sport, you have Devin Haney and Bill Haney right now, coming up in the sport. Teofimo and Junior Lopez, Danny Garcia and Angel Garcia. And the list goes on and on and on. It just kind of never stops. And so because it's just, inevitably, it's this rocky road. And as I talk about, finding the struggle and finding the drama and finding what is, what these guys push through to become world champions. What do you endure? And what hits closer to home than that? That is family. That is father, son, it's a father breeding a form of violence into his son, controlled aggression, to be exhibited at the right time. It's just kind of, as a story, it's almost operatic. I think it's just really kind of, it has all the elements of something that I think people are interested in. So
Yeah, the 140-pound king, the guy who came after losing to Lomachenko, came on and beat Josh Taylor for the WBO title. So now he's the recognized Ring Magazine champion at 140. I mean, with all the big fights there, where did Jermaine Ortiz come from?
You know, Jermaine kind of he popped up. I don't want to say out of nowhere, but he was not, and he still is not. He's not respected. They talk about Tiafimo and Shakur and Gervonta and Devin, and they even talk about Ryan Garcia, who, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't belong in that conversation. Um, they don't talk about Jermaine. Jermaine beat Jamel Herring, which is a good win, but is not anything that anybody's really going to give you your flowers for. He was Lomachenko's sparring partner, and then he fought Lomachenko, and he fought him well. He lost that fight. He thinks he thinks he won that fight, but a lot of fighters think they won fights that they lost. But look, he went the distance with Loma. He fought well. He wasn't really ever in any trouble. He just especially in the latter rounds of that fight, he couldn't keep up. And Loma's just matrix style of fighting gave him fits. But Jermaine is a very good fighter, and I'll tell you, after spending time with him, phenomenally disciplined, phenomenally disciplined. And if you want to last in this business, you have to be a disciplined fighter, which I think mentally very, very difficult to do. But I just checked, I went back and every other day rather, I checked the odds of that fight. The odds makers are picking Jermaine to get steamrolled by Tiafimo. Tiafimo is like plus 850 and Jermaine is like minus 510. That's, they're not giving him a shot. I think he has a better shot than that. He's a very good fighter. He is sound. He's quick. He has excellent footwork, and he's not going to just be mentally broken. He's not going to have his will broken in the ring. Tiafimo, I think, is still one of the top 10 pound for pound best fighters. The loss to Kambosos was just a bad loss. It was like a promotion that went like a year because Triller went defunct and they were supposed to fight on Triller. And Tiafimo came out and wanted to take off Kambosos' head and went too hard, too quick, and lost the fight because of it. But he is still the guy who outboxed Vasily Lomachenko beautifully in a beautiful fight, outboxed Josh Taylor, and is a raw athlete on the level that few of the guys in the sport are. And I think, he's a very tough out. You can't just count on him to come in and kind of play to the level of his opponents as he's done in the past, as he did with Kambosos. But Jermaine, a minus 510, 550 dog, I don't think that's a good line at all. If you were feeling lucky, you could throw some coin on Jermaine there. I don't know, but it's Jermaine is a good fighter who should be talked about more. And look, to his credit, he's taken the big fights. He's taken Lomachenko and he's taken Tiafimo. What happens if he loses to Tiafimo now? You run the risk of them saying you can't beat the big boys, you can't beat the big fighters. But I still think he holds his own very well against these guys.
Can't wait for that one. Speaking of big fighters, let's talk about the heavyweight division. December 23rd, there was a big card when the smoke cleared. Joseph Parker was on top. Deontay Wilder lost. And Anthony Joshua gets a chance to face Francis Ngannou. What's your thought about all this madness?
My thought about Deontay is that, look, Deontay was never a great boxer. Deontay was a great puncher. And so anytime Deontay walked into a ring with someone who was a good boxer, he ran the risk of losing that fight. And, that inevitably was just going to happen again as it's happened before to him. Tyson Fury is a damn good boxer, and he outboxed Deontay Wilder. And I think that's, how you saw. I was actually surprised. I was impressed that Deontay in that third fight even the first fight was able to show as well as he did against Fury. I thought Fury was going to run through him. Anthony Joshua, damn good boxer. He didn't lose to Andy Ruiz by accident. Andy Ruiz came in with a plan, and Andy Ruiz, looked like he ate every Snickers bar on the planet in the rematch, and that's why he lost the rematch to Anthony Joshua. Someone pointed out made a really good point. Anthony Joshua does not serve to benefit in this fight versus Francis Ngannou. You are supposed to win this fight. You are not supposed to get knocked down as Ngannou did to Tyson Fury. Shame on Tyson Fury for getting knocked down. Good for Francis Ngannou. But if you beat Francis Ngannou, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. If you lose or you don't look good, you're going to get crushed for this. Now, there's always the money argument. You know, is he making a big enough purse and he makes it worth it? Maybe he is. I don't know what his purse is right now. But, you know, if you're making a nice payday, sure, I guess. But don't lose. Don't get knocked down. Don't get caught with an Ngannou brick of a right hand and get floored, which Anthony Joshua definitely, you know, is prone to having happen to, as we saw. I don't think it's a good fight for him to take. I think that Anthony Joshua should be fighting somebody more legitimate in the heavyweight division. And if Francis Ngannou, I'm not predicting that Francis Ngannou is going to win that fight, but if he does, good for Francis Ngannou and shame on Anthony Joshua.
Before that, February 17th, Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury for the unification heavyweight titles. What's your thought about that fight?
Alexander Usyk wins. Usyk is really impressive, man. I mean, he's been really impressive for a very long time. And you talk about someone who seems really unfazed by any moment that he walks into. He doesn't care about the size of his opponent. You know, again, Tyson Fury is a damn good boxer. I don't know what happened to him in the Ngannou fight, why he allowed himself to look so mediocre. But I don't expect him to look like that again. I expect him to rise to the occasion. I think maybe he took Ngannou lightly. I think Usyk wins that fight. Usyk is a really outstanding boxer, and has shown that to be true time and again. And I don't think that the size difference is a problem for him in this fight. I think that he goes in there and he blitzes Tyson Fury and he beats him. He outpoints him.
Also, Zhilei Zhang is going to face Joseph Parker. That's the number 4 and 5 heavyweights respectively. Depends on who you ask. What you think about that?
Probably Zhang. Zhang's kind of like, you know, I didn't know much about him until relatively recently. I like him. I think he gets it done against Parker.
Well, I appreciate your answer to that question. And also, we appreciate your time. It's been a great time. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy yourself today.
Thanks, Jose. I appreciate it, man.
And we hope to have you on again when the documentary of the unnamed fighter comes out. Hopefully we'll come on and talk about that and anything else that you have happening. And again, we appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on.